So there's this tiny island in the Pacific, and at one point, nearly 4 out of 5 adults there became overweight. Some of the highest rates of type 2 diabetes anywhere on Earth. But here's the strange part. Just a few decades earlier, this same island was one of the wealthiest places on the planet per person. Richer than the United States, richer than most of Europe. So, how does a country go from extraordinary wealth to having a metabolic crisis all in under one generation? It's bird poison. This is Nauru, 21 square kilometers, about 10,000 people. You can literally drive around the entire country in under an hour. For most of history, this was a standard Pacific island. People fished, they grew taro, they collected coconuts. And for thousands of years, seabirds had been nesting on Nauru. And what do you get when millions of birds nest on an island? Lots and lots of bird poo. Layer after layer, over time through heat and chemistry, all that waste excreted out, transformed into rocks rich in phosphate. By the way, phosphate is one of the key ingredients in a fertilizer. A single 50-pound bag can go for as high as $50. And Nauru was sitting on approximately 90 million metric tons of phosphate in the Pacific Ocean. Colonial powers saw this unclaimed wealth and started mining the phosphate in the early 1900s. But the real story begins in 1968 when Nauru regains its independence and has about 40 million metric tons left to mine. By 1975, Nauru's per capita GDP hit around $50,000, second only to Saudi Arabia. There was no income tax, and all that money went to some of the most bizarre displays of wealth in history. There's a story that the island's police chief famously imported a Lamborghini, just that he was too bulky to fit behind the wheel. And the island only had one 12-mile paved road with a speed limit of 25 kilometers per hour. He eventually just left it to rust in the sun. The state-owned Air Nauru owned a fleet of Boeing 737s that were often flying nearly empty, flying citizens to Australia just to buy processed snacks, candies, and canned meat. In between all of this, everybody just had one job, and that is to keep digging. And the more they dug, the less of island they had left. Because phosphate mining strips land completely. You're basically removing topsoil and stripping everything down to bare coral limestone. What gets left behind are sharp, jagged pinnacles that can't be used for farming nor for construction. By the 1990s, 80% of Nauru's interior looked like this. The center of the country became so unusable that almost everyone started moving towards the narrow coastal strip around the edge. And without fertile land, farming coconuts and taro became impossible. And runoff from the mines damaged the reefs, killing traditional fish supply. And the people of Nauru became dependent on imported canned food. Fresh fish was replaced by spam.
Spam.
The name is pretty ironic for what they were actually selling. And traditional drinks were replaced by sugary sodas. And when they did eat meat, they preferred to have turkey tails and mutton flaps. These are like the highest fatty parts of the meat, with over 75% of calories coming from fat alone. Now, of course, all of this was bound to show up in the body. By the late 90s, the people were becoming extremely obese, with over 94% being considered overweight and 40% having diabetes. Now, Nauru had another problem. With their phosphate levels almost empty, there was nothing to export and there was no money coming in. So, to sustain this lifestyle, the government decided to become a tax haven for the Russian mafia. At its peak, $70 billion in Russian capital flowed through shell banks registered in Nauru. When the World Banks cracked down on this money laundering, Nauru found a new way to make even more money. They became an offshore detention center of refugees for the Australian government. This eventually became the island's primary GDP contributor. Between 2014 and 2020, Australia poured $2.5 billion into the island to keep the high security prison running. But with all that extra money coming in, there was another problem that Nauru had to deal with. Phosphate rock naturally contains trace heavy metals, including cadmium. When the island was strip mined, that cadmium was released into the surrounding soil and water, contaminating the whole environment. So, along with the obesity, they now had to deal with the poisonous side effects of cadmium, which damage their kidneys and cause cancer. Over the last decade, the government has introduced taxes for sugary drinks and tobacco. It has also expanded diabetes screening programs and started projects to restore parts of the island that were destroyed by mining. But problems like this takes a lot of time to undo. It took Nauru thousands of birds and millions of years to build up those phosphate reserves. And it took us only under 50 years to mine all of it away. We like to think of Nauru as an outlier, a strange little island with a bird poop problem. But when you look at our global food systems, our depleting resources, and increasing waistlines, Nauru is a preview into what could happen to us if we don't fix our lifestyle habits.